The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we're just going to give it another minute or so here just to make sure we get, give people a chance to join. And so in about a minute, we'll get started, and then we'll show everyone today's session on job forecasting. So we'll start in momentarily. Okay. I think we're good to go. So why don't we kick it off? Let's get started.
Hi guys. So we're tag teaming this again today. So you've got Aisha and Joe. We are today talking about job forecasting, and this is a really important topic. We found that there's not a lot of people truly utilizing this screen, and we wanted to make sure that you all understood the reason we built it and how to go about using it to really better your business. So we've got a screen, for those of you who are unaware, we've got a screen in the software called Job Forecast. And today we're going to take you through that screen. We're going to go through and Joe's going to take you through an overview of what it is to forecast and why use this screen, what does it do for you. We're going to go through the benefits of this screen. So the screen is called Job Forecast, but there are so many other uses that we built into that screen that there are way more benefits than just forecasting on that particular screen. So we're going to take you through that, and then we're going to actually dive into the program and talk about how it works. How would you use this screen to optimize your job and run your jobs efficiently and effectively? And then we'll open it up for questions. So for those of you who have questions, please feel free to use the chat bar. We will address all of the questions at the end. So don't be afraid to type away as we go through it, and we'll address all of those towards the end. Joe?
Okay, awesome. Thanks for the intro, Aish. So yeah, let's get started and talk about kind of an overview of the job forecasting and what it is, right? So I always like to start at the very beginning, right? What does this all come down to? Why do we forecast? Why do we do things like report? What is the purpose of this, right? Well, our construction businesses are geared towards obviously making money. And to do that, we need to make sure that we're accurately tracking the costs on our jobs so that we can ensure that our margins aren't getting affected, right? But even in that instance, right, it's never always going to go perfectly as planned. And so things change and things happen along the job. And so all the transactions, all these changes that we make to our projects are essentially what are going to affect that bottom line, right? So this ultimate goal is to maintain profitability on our jobs so that the company can make money. So there's kind of two things that you can do to really help make the decisions in order to stay on track, right? So number one is reporting. So when you look at your reports and your job cost reports, what it's doing is it's giving you a story and painting a picture for you of what's happened in the past, what's happened so far on the job, right? Like, for example, you've got $50,000 of costs on a given line, and now you're 100% complete that line. Well, what happens if something changes and one of the other trades messes up the work that that particular trade did, and now you're going to have to pay that trade additional money to fix it, right? So what I'm trying to get across here is that it's not just the reporting and the past that's important to make decisions, but it's also the future, right? And so that is where job forecasting comes into play. And as Aisha mentioned, a lot of companies do the reporting part correctly, and that's fantastic because you're going to be able to make decisions off of that, but you also have to make decisions based off what's going to happen, right? And so that's essentially what job forecasting is. It's making projections for the future so that you know where you're going to end up by the end of the project, right? And so there's so many uses here, right? It increases the collaboration, and it also allows for accountability so that you can make sure you're staying on task. So again, just to kind of highlight, what is job forecasting, right? So it's future projections that, you know, yourself as a project manager wants to be able to input into your job, right? Because our screen, you know, auto-calculate what the forecast is for you based on what you put in. But what if you want to manually adjust that, right? And so that's kind of what the forecasting is. It's a more advanced technique that allows you guys to put yourself in the driver's seat, take control of your job so you can really accurately forecast what your margin is going to be. But not only that, you know, why is that important? Well, as I mentioned, right, your goal at the end of the day is to make sure that your projects are making money. So when your boss comes to you and say, hey, we lost X amount of margin, or, you know, we gained this amount of margin, great job. Why was that? Well, with the job forecast screen, what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to track those changes. So there's detailed lines that are showing you exactly the changes you made. So when your boss comes to you and says, why did you lose money, or what happened here, you're going to be able to show them exactly what happened. And that's kind of the purpose of doing it and why it's going to be important for you. Now, there's also a ton of benefits that you can get from the screen as well, right? So number one, as I mentioned, is forecasting the margin on the job. Again, I've reiterated that many times already. That's kind of the key goal, to make sure that you guys are making money. And so forecasting allows you to adjust that. So how we adjust that forecast is through what we call anticipated costs. So anticipated costs could be anything from, you know, an uncommitted cost that is, you know, you guys foresee that are coming in to fix or correct an issue on the project. Could also be a change order, right? Like, just because you might have to eat up a cost doesn't mean there might be any changes to the budget, right? So an anticipation in that increased cost may also mean that you guys also need to create a change order, right? And so what that does is it allows you to modify your current projected forecast by adding your own inputs in there manually and overriding that value. And so it also provides you more things like the drill down capabilities. This was a recent feature that was added. And obviously, I think one of the things that all of our clients like is the ability for you guys to drill down into information very easily. You simply click on a field and it takes you to that particular item or that particular screen, right? The other thing is it also permits customized reporting. And so I'll definitely take that into more detail once I show the screen and how you guys can achieve that. Most importantly is also the customized screen view, right? So as project managers, sure, you guys are going to need the same information, but that's going to differ. Those preferences are going to differ from user to user. So we actually allow you guys to customize the screen view. And what that's going to do is it's not going to change. If you modify the screen in the column order, it's not going to change for the other user. It's going to remember the last one you guys used so that you can keep that same format and show the information that's relevant and important to you. Not only that, but it also gives you quick view into the variances, right? So that's another important thing. When there's changes on the project, you also want to be able to track that. And so with our forecasting module, you guys can actually go from a month-to-month basis and basically be able to report and input those anticipated costs in those different periods. So you can see where the changes happened, what was the previous forecast, what's the current forecast, and so on and so forth. And most importantly is customizing the Eac formula. So I'm going to jump into the software now so we can talk a little bit more about that since that's the kind of the foundation of the forecasting.
Hey, Joe, what's EAC?
So, yeah, great question. So the EAC is known as the estimate at completion. And that's, again, a term that means so many different things to so many people, but it's all the same thing, right? Whether it's your forecast, whether it's your projection, all means the same thing. That's what your estimate at completion is, where you're going to end up by the end of the job. And so looking at a sample of one of our job cost reports, right? This is the job cost progress report. These are where you're going to see this information, right? And so when you're looking at these reports, how you see the changes or adjustments to this forecast will be done through the job forecast screen. But there's actually 3 ways you can arrive at this value you see right here. And so we'll do a quick, brief explanation of this. We talked about it in last week's webinar as well, but since estimate at completion is the foundation of forecasting, it's important to make sure we understand how it works. So there's 3 ways that you can arrive at your EAC, or your estimate at completion. The first one is the automated calculation. So if you guys don't want to do your advanced forecasting, you don't want to make changes to the EAC, completely fine. Our system uses an intuitive formula to calculate it for you. And that formula is as follows. It takes the higher of either your current estimate or your cost to date and your outstanding commitments. So to kind of, again, get the logic behind that, why does that make sense? Well, your current estimate is essentially what your budget is at the current point in time, as of today. And so that takes the sum of what you originally budgeted for and plus any approved change orders. Change orders in our system are how you guys also update your budget. So you never want to be touching your original budget, because that's kind of to test the accuracy of your estimating team. And so any changes to that budget or the variance will be entered as change orders. So the sum of those two gives you your current budget. On the other side of it, you've got your actual costs, right? So those would be any committed or uncommitted costs, and you want to be able to track also the outstanding commitment on them. And so the whole purpose of this is to make sure that you're getting which is going to be higher at the current point in time. So for example, on this particular line here, you can see that our estimate at completion is $50,000. And that's because our current budget is also the same as our actuals and outstanding commitments, right? So even though we haven't incurred those costs yet, because we budgeted for $50,000, the automatic formula is assuming, okay, you're probably going to spend $50,000 as well. But on the other hand, what happens when you go over budget, right? Well, when your actual costs exceed your budget, then that's where that is going to kick into play in terms of the automated formula. So if our costs were, for example, $60,000 and we only budgeted for $50,000, well, obviously we've already spent $60,000, and so the system is going to use that higher number of the actuals as your estimate at completion or your forecast, because you've already spent that much, right? So as you can see, that's how that automatic formula works, by taking the higher of the two. But what happens if you're not happy with that formula? If you want more control over it, that's where the job forecast comes into play. And so this is kind of how it works, is how you manually override it. And so how you manually override it, as I mentioned, is through adding in what are called anticipated costs. And so these are modifications that are going to increase your EAC. So let's do a quick example of how you can go and add in a anticipated cost. And so right here, you see this anticipated cost worksheet. You choose the item that you want to modify, and you simply click add. And so once you do that, it allows you, as I mentioned, to give you a description of exactly what this is, right? So we're going to say forecast adjustment, right? And, you call it demo, whatever the case may be. Again, it's the purpose of keeping the accountability to see where things have gone, right? And so let's enter in the amount here. And so you'll see I've now increased my anticipated costs by $20,000, as you can see right here. So based on my current $50,000, I should now see an EAC of 70. in the current period. And so looking at the job forecast screen, very easily you can see how the estimate at completion has been updated. So that's also going to flow into these reports when you're also running it as of the same month. And so that's very, very important to make sure you're keeping in mind, right? And so as you can see, my EAC has now been updated to 70,000, right? So it's not only enough to do the adjustments, but also making sure it's tying out and flowing out to the other reports. And so as you can see, the system is now using your manual projection as the EAC number, and that's how you can do it. Now, there's also a third option that you guys can do here, and it's called the ignore budget feature. And so that's also something that you can add in through the column customization, right? So another thing that I mentioned about the screen is how you guys can easily go in here and add columns. So I'm going to go ahead and add this ignore budget column so you guys can see, in a matter of seconds, it just adds in the additional column, right? And so what you're seeing here is that option to ignore budget. So what this ignore budget feature means is it's another advanced way of calculating your EAC. And so what it does is it actually ignores your budget number. So looking at this report, it ignores what your budget is, and it actually takes into account your actual costs, your outstanding commitments, and then any anticipated costs you enter through here. So why is that important? Well, sometimes you might not want to calculate that EAC based off of your budget. You want to see what was actually spent. That's the things that are going to input your forecast. Well, very simply, on the lines that you want to do it, you simply would check it off, and that's the calculation that it would use. So if I had additional outstanding commitments or costs, it would automatically factor as that formula. So as I mentioned, it's your actual costs plus your outstanding commitments plus any anticipated costs that you add into the system. Okay, so that's a little bit of a basic kind of description of how the forecasting, how the EAC number works. So before we kind of talk about the other uses of the screen and what the screen can be used for, let's go through some of the other information on these tabs here. So what you're seeing is through this main tab is a basic overview of the budget. And these are kind of, preset lines that we figured would be, very good to arrive at the final number. And so it shows you everything from your budget, your commitments, your actuals, how much of the budget you've even used up, and what your commitment is. And again, you can actually go ahead, as I mentioned, and move these columns around so you guys can get that customized view. Very important so that it's unique to you guys. Now, these other tabs you're seeing here are also things that are affecting your budget, things that are affecting your forecast that it allows you to drill into, right? So if I want to see my change orders on a particular line, right? Like let's take a look at this line here. I've got a change order for 25,000. I can see exactly where that change order is by clicking on it right here. And so once I do that, the system is going to open up the change orders module, filter it for you, and show you the details of that change order. So you can see everything from the costs, the revenues associated with it, and you've got it right there. Nice, easy flow. So the point is, it's also a working screen. It allows you to find that information that way. And so it does the same thing as well for your purchase orders, your subcontract change orders. All of this can be found on a line-by-line basis, and it can be sorted and filtered very easily so you guys can find and look for the ones you want. And most importantly, the actual costs, right? You want to be able to track what were the costs on each one of these jobs, right? So if I go in here and again and click and drill down, it's going to take you to the invoice inquiry. So you can see exactly the invoices, and you could see the backup, the distribution, the dates, the dollar amounts, whether it's been paid or not, all very easy, all right from the job forecast screen. And then also here, as I mentioned, you've got your anticipated cost worksheet tab. So that being said, that's kind of high level what the screen is, what the screen does. So now let's talk about the uses, right? We've got different uses of the screen. How does it work, right? So as Aisha mentioned, we've originally designed this screen for forecasting, right? So you guys can project where you're going to end up. But there's multiple uses of the screen. So the first one and the most obvious one is forecasting, right? How do you guys go about managing your projections and dealing with that, right? So that is the one thing that you can do through the screen. And so to do that is through this anticipated cost worksheet. And so what happens is you can go in across all of the lines and you'll notice that it changes based on the line you're working on, right? So it's not all cluttered together. It's very easy to organize through. So, if you want to go in on each one of these lines, let's add in the descriptions here, right? So this one is going to be masonry, right? And we're going to have an additional, cost of, let's say, $10,000 on this line. And you're going to see where I'm going with this, because you guys also want to be able to track all of the anticipated costs on a period by period basis, right? So you guys as the project managers go in, make your adjustments, and take a look on each line, and you add in those adjustments, right? And so once you're done, again, this updates on your report in real time so you can see these changes here, right? Here's my anticipated costs on this line, and this line. What happens if I go to the next period? Well, you're going to see that it's now changed, right? You're not seeing any anticipated costs in the current period, but you will see the ones from the prior period. And why this is important is because as you guys enter in those costs that come in, or maybe they don't, this is what allows you to check it off either as completed, so it removes the anticipated cost, or you can even revise it, right? So you don't have to go back to the period that you were in. You can simply go to the next one and easily revise it by clicking this value right here. And so if I wanted to cancel out a value, I would simply hit revise, and then it would allow me to change the value here very easily, right? Creates a new record. It's as simple as that. The other thing you're getting from the screen, though, is to easily report on those anticipated costs or on those projections. And so to do that, what you've got here is this anticipated cost report. So by clicking on that, it's actually going to open up a report for you and detail out for you the changes that you've got on the job based on as of the current period. So keep in mind, it pulls in all the anticipated costs up to that point in time. So very easily at the end of the month, right, if you're going over this with, your owner who wants to say, what changes have you made on each code or each line item? Well, very easily you run this report, you've got the information here. And not only that, provides the description so they can see why it is, right? So they don't have to go in line by line. You've got this nice and neat report that you can just print out, go over it together, and look at those projections. So that being said, once you've done that, you can also even add additional notes, right? So if you want to add notes to particular lines that might not even have additional, costs or projected costs, well, you can very easily add notes there too. And so every time you click on the line, it's going to notify you. And so you can even add an alert, whether you want an alert or not, it's up to you. But the point is, you're getting the key information and the accountability behind it so that your boss and yourself both know what are the changes, and most importantly, how it's varied from your budget, right? And so as I mentioned, it's a working screen, and that's why you can do things like add in anticipated costs. But let's talk a little bit more about the next thing, which is also your budget management, right? So you can forecast very easily from the screen. What about managing your budget? Well, you can also do that very easily. And so we'll do a very basic example. So one of our lines here is called a contingency reserve. And that varies again from company to company, business to business, and whether or not you choose to insert a contingency reserve line into your budget. But for those who may or may not know, what a contingency reserve is, it's essentially a second bucket of funds that you've got as kind of a backup in case one of your other line items goes over budget or you ran out of budget. And so it's more so the purpose of is to hedge the risk against your margins so that you'll know, okay, I projected this much margin on my job with a buffer of, in my example here, $100,000 more or less, right? And so whether or not you use all of that up is up to you guys, but that's kind of showing you that you've kind of planned for that, potential risk of other items coming in. And so what they'll typically do, what clients will typically do, is they'll move budget around from line to line. And that's not just unique to contingency reserves, but sometimes that happens across your normal budget lines, right? Like if you had leftover budget from your architect line, you want to move it over to demolition, you could also transfer it between those lines too. And so how you can easily view that is with this over under budget line. So as you can see, over under budget is 0. That means you've got no more budget left. So you've got to be able to add that budget room in order for you guys to be able to add in costs, so it doesn't look like you guys are losing margin on the job. So when it's negative here, that means you're under budget or you haven't used the budget yet, right? So how could we go about moving it from, our contingency reserve to our demo line as an example? Well, the system facilitates that for you very, very, very easily right here with this transfer budget button. So all you want to do is click on the line that you want to transfer the budget from, right? And so it goes from this line and it goes to the other line you want. So you simply choose the demo line, you choose the correct cost type as well, right? And then you hit OK, right? And you choose the dollar amount, right? Let's say we want to move $20,000 over. Well, very easily you hit OK, and what it's going to do is it's going to automatically create an internal change order for you to move the budget from one to the other. So the internal change order is actually a $0 amount net $0 amount, because what you're trying to do is essentially move budget from one line to the other, right? So you're taking $20,000 out of the contingency, right? It's automatically marking for you transferred budget to this line, and budget was transferred from this line, right? So it even keeps track of that through the changes, and so the budget transfer is automated for you. Automatically marks it as internal, and you're set to go. All you do is you can even send it for internal approval if you're using our signatures approval feature. But just to go ahead and show you, once you approve the change order, very easily it facilitates that budget transfer. So now, right when you go back to the job forecast screen, you're going to see everything adjust in real time. So now you've got approved changes of 20K, bringing down the current budget on this line to 80. And now you can see we've got more budget left on the demo line, and we've now just very easily automated that budget transfer. Okay, that's a very common practice, happens all the time, very good to use for budget transfers. Now, another thing that I also like to showcase is our job budget control screen when it relates to budget transfers. Now, sometimes what happens is you guys might have multiple lines you want to transfer from and to as well. And so this job budget control screen can also really facilitate that easily too, right? Let's say, for example, you wanted to go and move budget from one line to two lines, right? So let's use our contingency reserve example here. Well, simply enter in the negative value to our contingency reserve and choose the lines we want to increase the budget on. So let's do these two lines here. And so once you do that, again, it's the same thing. You hit the generate change order button, and you've now just done a multi-transfer. And it's a matter of preference, right? Some individuals like to do that right from the job forecast screen. Some like to do all of their adjustments all at one point in time. And so in order to do that, the job budget control screen is fantastic for it, because as you can see, it very easily allows you to do it across multiple lines. So that's a little neat tip that I like to share.
I love that tip. I love that tip. The other thing that is worth mentioning here is if you create the budget transfer through the job forecast screen, we automatically mark that change order as an internal change order. If you raise the change order through the job budget control screen, it is not flagged as an internal change order, meaning it will show up on your billing.
Right, that's a great point. And so you just have to remember, if you're using the job budget control feature, you check off the internal change order button, and then it won't show up on your billings, right? So very great point. And that's another as I mentioned, kind of neat tip when it comes to budget transfers, budget management, and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's kind of the second use of the job forecast screen, is managing your budget, right? And so even as you can see when you come down here, how everything updates in real time, that internal change order will show up there so you can see all of the adjustments that happen to the line. So let's talk about the third one, and probably one of the most anticipated ones is the custom reporting. So a lot of times clients ask me, you know, can I add or remove columns on this report or that report? And so why, you know, we've kind of designed these reports as such is it's, you know, kind of the industry standard. These are kind of all of the items that you're going to need on one report: your budget, your commitments, your actuals, and your forecasts. So we also added the screen in because it can also act as a customized cost report. And so a lot of clients have asked me, how do I add columns or remove columns or get this report or get that information? Well, the job forecast was also designed for that purpose. So what you're seeing right here in the top corner of the screen is the column settings button. So what happens is once you click on that button, it shows up all of the available columns that you've got, right? So you can see month-to-month variance, right? That's probably a pretty important one. I want to see that, right? But maybe my previous month you know, my projected commitments, you know, I really don't want to see my commitments. I just want to see, you know, the actuals only, because those pending aren't actually in there. And so, you know, maybe I don't need that. But on the other hand, those pending amounts could also be your potential anticipated costs. So again, it goes back to what's important for you to see, right? And so that's why it allows you to add or remove columns and even reorganize them. So you can even reorganize them through this, right? So if I hit move up, simply moves the column over. Once I hit OK, you're going to see it reorganizes them.
Joe,
that's one way.
Joe,
oh, sorry,
do I have to redo this every time I go into the screen?
No, so that's a great point too. So once you guys have your customized setup, you know, what it's going to do is it's going to remember the last one you used when you come back to the job forecast. And again, as I mentioned, that's unique to a user level. So it doesn't set that to the system level. It's going to remember the one that you guys use, so that once you use it, it's going to remember, you know, the structure that you used, right? So if you even want to rearrange the cost type and put the cost type first and then the cost item, you can do that, right? But most importantly, if I were to close and reopen the screen, it's going to show up in the exact order I want. And that goes to the next point, where how you can reorganize these columns too. So you don't have to do it through this column settings button. What you guys can also do is you can rearrange a column simply by dragging and dropping them, right? So let's say I want my outstanding commitment to be before my total actuals, and I want my budget to be before, I want my anticipated cost to be before my over under budget, my estimate to completion to be before my estimate at completion, right? Organize it in a way that makes sense to you, right? How much budget have I utilized? Well, I probably want to see that before I go and make anticipated changes to my cost. So it's very easy to go about doing that, right? So the kind of key point here is, again, customize it in a way that makes sense to you. But as I mentioned, even if you're not using the screen to forecast, you can use it as a cost report, because it's still telling you all the information here. Whether or not you've got anticipated costs or not, this screen auto-populates with the same information that you would see on a job cost progress report. So my point is, use the screen to also format the columns that you want to see, or the columns that are important to you. And so once you do that, very, very easily, you can even export it to Excel. And so if you want to see the report in that kind of format, we've added that option because we know a lot of individuals like to export things to Excel. So we've obviously added that flexibility in there, and you'd be able to view it in Excel. And so I'm just going to pull that up in just a second. And it's going to also format it in a way where you guys can also filter through it. And so once you've kind of filtered through it too, it also allows you guys to, again, add to that viewability. But even the other point is here is you can also add in the ability to filter right from this screen too. So if you only want to look at one particular cost item, cost type, you can also filter through it that way. Okay. And so to show you kind of how the Excel export looks like, there you have it. It's the exact same information, formatted the exact same way, and it's just an Excel format. So if you guys even wanted to create your own advanced formulas, by all means, you could also add that to the sheet. Keep in mind, you need to export it the next time to make sure you're using the updated values. Okay. Alrighty, and so we've come down now to the final use of this report or the screen, and that is the investigation, right? So it's one thing to be able to forecast, and another to manage your budget, and the third, create your own customized cost report. Well, now you also want to be able to dig deep, drill down into details, see where you can find that. And so as you can see, all of our reports have that drill down capability where, for example, from a job cost progress report, clicking on the cost to date, it opens that right up from the screen, right? But the only difference is when you're doing that from the job cost progress report, again, this is just reporting. This is information from the past. You want to be able to use the information, make decisions, or act on it. And so that's where the job forecast screen comes into play. So from the job forecast screen, as I mentioned, you can have all of this drill down capability right from the job forecast screen and then be able to act on those decisions, right? So for example, if I've got actual costs here that were incorrectly allocated, I can go in, drill down to those details. It's going to show me again that invoice inquiry. And so very easily, I know what my $50,000 of cost consists of, right? And so that's, you know, the major benefit of that. And so going back to job forecast, you get that across all levels, even your subcontract agreements, right? So if I've got subcontracts, I've got subcontract change orders, you would be able to see both of those, right? And it's set up in a very logical flow where if, for example, I went to the subcontract screen and I wanted to see what was the original contract, well, you're probably also going to want to see the current contract amount, right? And so, for example, when I drill down on that particular subcontract, it shows me not only the original contract, but it also shows me the approved changes against it. And so right even from the subcontract screen, when I click this view sub change orders button, very nicely, it opens up the sub change order screen and it shows me only the subcontract change orders related to that subcontract. So even for investigating purposes and digging down and drilling deeper into this information, it's organized in a way that's easy for the information to find. So you don't have to spend the time and do that extra click and type in the filter for subcontract 122 or the filter for the sub change order number. The purpose is whether you go to the subcontract screen or even from the job forecast directly to the sub change order screen, the information's right there, it's in your face, and you don't have to go digging for it. So that's an important thing in terms of investigation. And not only that, even audits, right? Like if you're being audited and you need to look for, particular transactions on a particular job, well, very easily, you simply can drill down and it takes you to the information. And like you saw with the actual costs, you can very easily drill down into the information and find even the backup of that original invoice. Because that's one that we get a lot too, is you want to be able to see the backup of the invoice. And so that's why it's very important to also attach the backups to those records. Now, one more thing to add about this, the job forecast screen, is the ability to lock your forecast. So this feature is really important because what happens is you might want to lock changes so you're not going back into previous periods, right? And so that could be, again, that's a matter of preference in terms of the level of control, your company wants to have. But, in the example, so project managers, can't go back and adjust a forecast down or up to say, oh yeah, no, I actually projected 40,000 when it was really, you projected 20,000, right? And so that's a good way of making sure there's control, to making sure there's accountability. But also it's important to make sure you're not making adjustments in the wrong period, right? It happens all the time. We're human. We make mistakes. right? And so let's say, you meant to add in a transaction in May, right? But you were working on April before, and so the screen pulls up that you're in the April period. Well, guess what? You lock the forecast, it prevents you from making adjustments to the anticipated costs in that period, right? So we've kind of got it streamlined from start to finish to make sure there's the level of controls in place, there's the streamlined workflow for you guys to find the information and then act on it. And so that is, in a nutshell, sorry, yeah.
Hey Joe, where do we lock the forecast? It looks like I can just lock it and unlock it on my own from that screen.
Great question. So you actually can't do it from the job forecast screen. Where this needs to be done is actually from the fiscal period screen. And so just to show you where you go about doing that, you open up the fiscal period screen, you now see there's a new column there that says lock job forecast. And so the importance there is because our transactions are tracked from the fiscal periods in our system. So by locking the job forecast from here, that's what would make it locked here. So you can't actually lock it from the job forecast screen. You can only do it from the fiscal period screen. And again, that's so you guys can keep that level of control to the individuals that should be maintaining that, like a controller, for example, wanting to make sure there's no changes, to any costs in those periods, right? But most importantly, that you're not updating the anticipated cost records in those locked periods.
And just to add to that, so the recommended workflow there is once the controller is closed the month, that would be the ideal time to close the fiscal period, the forecast period. So that's why the two are located in the same area. Is we're recommending that the two get closed and locked at the same time, because that's kind of your point in time that you're drawing in the sand as to the month is done, nothing else should be posted.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, right? Like basically, and kind of like even in my experience working for a construction company, what we used to do is, our controller would make sure, that everyone's costs were in, everyone's updates have been made so that, there's nothing else being entered, right? Because the other problem with that is if you have to remember, go back and do it by job basis, then, there's obviously the risk that, things get left out or you missed a particular job, and then that just increases the risk of error. So by doing it in one spot, kind of streamlines it, takes care of it. So we usually recommend to not close it until you've essentially finalized that period. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so that is, the job forecast in a nutshell. So I guess we'll open up the floor to any other questions that may be outstanding, or and yeah.
So we've got some, Joe, so I'll throw them over to you. The first one is it would be beneficial to have a column on the job cost reports that display the anticipated costs applied to the cost code or line item.
Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming they mean on this job cost report here. Yeah. Well, so yeah, I mean that's definitely a great idea. But the other thing is you can also get this exact report on the job forecast screen too, right? Like you could simply recreate that too. But that's also a good enhancement request as well. As it comes in. But the other thing is again, right? Not everyone is using anticipated costs, so that also has to be flexible to whether who's using it or who's not.
The other main differentiator there is that the job forecast is kind of a working screen to allow you to put in those anticipated or those gut feelings that the project manager has. You don't necessarily want to solidify that and show it on the job cost progress report. The job cost progress report should be showing you, your final changes and actual budget. So once the anticipated cost has been entered, that should only be sitting there up and until that change is finalized via a change order. Once the change order goes in, well, then the job cost progress report gets updated. So I can understand how some people might feel like it's nice, but we're trying to create that differentiation between you know, that working screen, that job cost forecast and the job cost progress, which is kind of the solidified, here's as it
Yeah.
stands without the, you know, unknown factor.
And again, right, like that EAC number incorporates that anticipated cost, and because, as you mentioned, it's not a solidified number, you know, it might not necessarily, you know, be needed to show on this, you know, particular report.
So the next question here is, if you add an anticipated cost, what happens when the actual cost is posted? Does the reporting now include that cost twice?
Great question. So that was kind of going back to what I was mentioning before in terms of making sure you mark these items as completed in the next period, right? So when that actual cost comes in, right, let's say it's now June and those anticipated costs come in, the most important thing is that you're making sure you're marking the previous anticipated cost as completed, because what that does is it reduces the anticipated cost, right? So think of it as like a scale, right? Your anticipated cost goes up. In order for your forecast to stay aligned and not duplicate, you got to make sure the anticipated cost goes down when that actual cost comes in, right? Because again, it goes back to that EAC formula. How does that get updated? Well, I increase my costs, I increase my forecast, I increase my budget. One of those three inputs is going to update the end forecast. So in order to make sure that you're not doubling up, you simply mark these as completed.
Awesome. Does the budget transfer change the schedule of values on the pay application?
Great question. So as you mentioned, Aisha, when you use the transfer budget feature, it automatically marks the change order as internal. So it actually doesn't show up on your pay apps if the budget adjustments are internal, right? So that's kind of the key differentiator there. But also, you know, typically if there's revenue involved, you know, with it, that's when you approve the change order, when you're going to update the pay apps, right? And even on items like cost plus billing too, right? Because those budget changes are internal, you know, maybe that's important to you. If you want your client to see it, then that's maybe not an internal change. You want your client to be able to see that.
Awesome. Can you lock job forecast by job instead of for the whole company?
Oh, so that was kind of that last point we talked about, why it's beneficial to do it kind of the company as a whole versus job by job basis. Again, it's to make sure things are kind of streamlined and automated so that you guys don't have to go job by job to do that, or you shouldn't be locking it for certain jobs, right? And it's a risk factor, right? And so by having the ability to lock it at the end is typically how it works is, as I mentioned, you know, you get that final okay once everyone's got their costs, their forecasts in, right? Then you lock the period at the end and it locks it for all jobs for you.
There is a lock for the individual jobs located on the job screen. And so you can utilize that, and it should, if I remember correctly, should stop you from even entering an anticipated cost. I know that if you lock the jobs on the job screen itself, it will prevent any commitments or actual costs getting posted to the job. But if it's something that you're looking to just do monthly, you would have to be cognizant that you have to go back in and unlock it at the start of the new month.
Yeah, exactly. That's you know, fantastic point there. You know, you definitely can do that, but typically, you know, that lock job costs ability right here, what that is kind of typically for is to make sure that, you know, the job's still open, but you don't want to be posting any cost to it anymore, right? And so if you want to use that, you know, absolutely, like, you know, by all means, but it just means you got to go back and unlock it after, right? And so that's kind of why, you know, I would recommend doing it from the fiscal period screen all in one shot, just so it makes it easier for you guys and it doesn't interrupt the flow of the actual cost, and only is affecting the anticipated ones.
So we've got a question here about the Excel add-in, and I think what I'll do, Marlon, is I'll take that one offline. just because it's kind of off topic and we're running short. So the job summary query question we'll take offline for sure. What screen can I utilize in order to understand the projected final revenue and the estimated cost at completion on the same screen or grid?
Great question. Yeah, so variety of reports that you can go about doing that. If you want a high-level one, job summary report, right? That's going to show you kind of end game, what is my overall cost on the job, what is my overall revenue, and also designed to be run across, multiple jobs, right? Because it's so high level. And so the job summary report would be a good example of that. And our forecasts are available on a lot of reports. So you'll see on the majority of reports, you've got this estimate at completion column, because that's a big, it's a big factor for you guys to track. And so very easily, you can see here your billing. This is your forecasted billing. This is your forecasted cost, right? If you wanted to see it on a more detailed basis, we've also got the job cost revenue report. We had a webinar last week. I'd highly recommend, if you wanted to learn a little bit more about the job cost reports, the terminology, the uses of the different reports, what they mean, what they do, when to run them. I'd highly recommend checking that out, because we kind of dove into it really nicely to cover all those things. And that was one of them that you just mentioned, being able to show the costs and revenues in one report, including the forecast projection.
Okay, and the last question here we have is, a lot of jobs are not populating in the job forecast module for my company across multiple users. Is this something that's being worked on? So just without getting into your actual environment, it seems that maybe there is some security settings on the job, and that's why they are not populating in the dropdown. The only reason why you would not see a job populate in a job dropdown is because the security features on the individual job may be enabled. So I would take a look at that, and that might be why. I'm getting another reply here. They populate in the dropdown, but the data doesn't load. No, that does not sound correct. So please, if you can email us at help@jonaspremier.com, we will take a look at your individual environment and see what's going on there. So thank you everybody for your questions and for taking the time to attend. We're going to stop here. We've taken a little bit more time than anticipated, but it's an important topic, and I'm glad we were able to provide some insight. I'm also curious to hear from you in terms of whether or not this webinar helped you in venturing into the job forecast screen and starting to use it. So please feel free to reach out to me personally, aisha.ali@jonaspremier.com. I'm happy to chat with you, and thank you again for your time. Have a fantastic day. And thanks, Joe. Great job.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And yeah, if you do have any questions that are support related, as Aisha mentioned, feel free to email us at help@jonaspremier.com, and we'll be able to take care of it for you. So thanks so much. And everyone, stay safe out there and have a fantastic day.